Okay, so you know that little box you have to check to prove you're not a robot? It seems so simple, right? Well, it's actually hiding one of the biggest untold stories on the entire internet. Turns out, what you've been doing every single time you log into a website, it's a lot more important than you probably think. All right, look at this number, 500,000. That's how many hours of let's call it a specific activity, happen across the globe every single day. So what in the world could possibly take up that much human time? Well, there it is. That's 500,000 hours of free human labor every day. It's like this massive invisible factory that's running 24/7. But the really wild part? It's who the workers are. It's you, and it's me. It's pretty much everyone who uses the internet. We've all been putting in shifts at this giant operation, and most of us had absolutely no idea what we were even building. So how on earth did this happen? To understand that, we have to go back to the early 2000s. Back then, the internet had a huge problem. Spam bots. They were everywhere, just wrecking forums, flooding email inboxes. It was a total mess. And this is where a professor at Carnegie Mellon, a guy named Louis von Ahn, comes in. He invents this thing called CAPTCHA, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those crazy, squiggly, warped words that a computer just couldn't figure out, but a human brain could. It was a pretty brilliant way to tell people and machines apart. But then, von Ahn has this just stroke of genius. He's looking at this and thinking, wait a minute, millions of people are spending a few seconds of their brain power solving these things every day. He realized, what if we could take all those tiny little bits of effort, add them all up, and use them for something huge? And just like that, reCAPTCHA was born. This was back in 2007. The system would show you two words, right? One was the control, the one it already knew, to prove you were human. But the second word, that was a word that a computer scanner couldn't read from an old book. So every time you typed it in, you were actually helping to digitize history. We're talking over 130 million books for projects like Google Books, and most of us were doing it without a clue. Then, in 2009, Google buys reCAPTCHA, and this is where the game completely changes. Suddenly, it wasn't about books anymore. Google had a much bigger, more ambitious goal in mind, and to pull it off, they were going to need a global workforce. And I guarantee you remember what came next. Suddenly, the squiggly words were gone. In their place, those 9 square photo grids. Click all the squares with a traffic light. Select every crosswalk. Oh yeah, we've all been there, clicking away hundreds and hundreds of times. But did you ever stop and think, where did these pictures even come from? You know, those kind of blurry, weirdly angled photos of street corners and signs? Yeah, they weren't just random stock photos. They came straight from Google's Street View cars, you know, the ones driving around photographing basically every road on the planet. That was the new mission. Google had billions of pictures, but its AI had no idea what it was looking at. It needed us to tell it. And this is the absolute key to the whole thing. You weren't really passing a test anymore. You weren't proving you were human. You were a teacher. Every single time you clicked on a bus or a storefront, you were pointing at it and telling Google's AI, hey, look, this is a bus. You were labeling data, building piece by piece one of the most valuable data sets the world has ever seen. Okay, so let's try to wrap our heads around the scale of this, because it is just mind-blowing. We're not talking about some small side project here. This was a global, invisible factory running at full steam. At its peak, 200 million. 200 million of these little puzzles were being solved every single day. Just think about that. That's a staggering amount of human brain power, all pointed at one single goal. Now, to put that in perspective, there are entire companies whose only job is to pay people to do this. It's called data annotation, and they pay pretty well, anywhere from $10 to $50 an hour. And how much were reCAPTCHA users getting paid for doing the exact same work? Yep, a big fat zero. So let's do some quick math. What's the value of all that free work? Even if we take the absolute low end, just $10 an hour, the work we were all doing was worth at least $5 million every single day. That's value that was just extracted for free. It was basically the price you paid to use the internet. So where did all that money, all that value, actually go? What exactly were we all building with this massive data set we created, click by click? Well, it mostly powered two giant Google projects. First, Google Maps. Ever wonder how it got so good at reading street signs or knowing exactly where a storefront is? A big part of that was you, your clicks. But the second one was even bigger. Waymo, Google's self-driving car company. Think about it. For a self-driving car to be safe, its AI has to recognize everything. Pedestrians, stop signs, other cars with almost perfect accuracy. To do that, it needs a massive training data set, what they call ground truth. And who provided that ground truth? We did, millions of us, for free. And today, Waymo is valued at tens of billions of dollars, and its entire foundation was built on our unpaid clicks. And that brings us to today, and to the final and maybe most ironic twist in this whole story, because the system has changed again, but the basic deal, it's still happening.
These days, you probably don't even see the picture grid that often. That's because of reCAPTCHA version 3. It works completely invisibly. It's actually watching your behavior, how fast you scroll, the way you move your mouse, and it creates a kind of behavioral fingerprint to figure out if you're human. And you guessed it, all of that data about how you behave, that also gets fed right back into Google's AI.
And this is the real kicker, the final irony. For years, the whole point was to prove you were human by doing something a machine couldn't. You were the teacher, showing the AI how to see the world. But in the process of doing that, you were teaching the AI how to do your job. You were literally training your own replacement. So the next time you're online, remember this story. Remember that every click, every mouse movement, it's all data, and that data has incredible value. Which leaves us with one last really big question to think about. In this new world that's being built on AI, your knowledge, your clicks, your behavior, that's the fuel. Who do you think should get to profit from it?